Do you believe in forgiving or forgetting?
It's strange how a single sentence can change the way you see every person at the table, how it can take years of carefully swallowing your pride, biting your tongue, and telling yourself this isn't worth the fight, and turn all of it into one sharp, clear moment where you finally know you're done playing along. That Sunday dinner was supposed to be nothing more than another predictable evening of the same family routine: Mom overcooking the roast, Dad pouring himself the first glass of wine before anyone else even sat down, Rachel arriving late but still managing to be the center of attention the second she walked through the door. It had all the same beats as every other family gathering, and I'd come in prepared to just get through it without reacting, because that's what I had trained myself to do over the years. I told myself I'd let their comments slide, that I'd smile politely, that I wouldn't let them pull me into the same old conversation about why my life choices didn't measure up to whatever gold standard they'd decided Rachel represented. We were halfway through the main course when Dad, with that smug little chuckle he does when he's winding up for something he thinks is clever, turned to me after a long, drawn-out toast about Rachel's latest achievement, a huge promotion at the firm, with a title most people work their whole lives to get, as he put it, and dropped the line he'd probably been rehearsing in his head all week. "So, Emily," he said, pausing just long enough to make sure all eyes were on me, "when are you going to get serious about your career?" He didn't even phrase it like a question he wanted an answer to. It was a jab wrapped in a fake laugh, the kind of thing meant to humiliate you in front of people who already believe the worst about you. For a second, I almost did what I always do: give a soft laugh, shrug, maybe make a self-deprecating joke that would make them feel comfortable again, the kind that signals, "Don't worry, I know my place in the family hierarchy." But something in me shifted, not in an angry outburst kind of way, but in that cold, steady way where you realize you no longer care about keeping the peace. I put my fork down, looked him right in the eye, and said, "I already did, I just didn't tell the people who'd laugh at it." My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the table chatter like someone had hit a mute button on the whole room. You could almost hear the way the words landed, sharp enough to make Rachel's smirk falter and Mom suddenly find a reason to fuss with the breadbasket instead of looking at me. They didn't ask what I meant. They didn't press for details. They just sat there in that awkward, stretched-out silence that told me they'd decided it was easier to dismiss my comment as nonsense than risk discovering that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the family underachiever they'd convinced themselves I was. Rachel let out the short, fake laugh, the kind that's supposed to dismiss you without saying anything at all, and started talking again about her corner office and travel allowance, like I hadn't just shifted the air in the room. But that was fine. Better than fine. Because I knew something they didn't, and I had no intention of giving them the satisfaction of finding out before I was ready to make them choke on it. I've spent most of my life being the other Carter sibling, the one whose milestones weren't worth making a fuss over, the one they could always compare unfavorably to Rachel without even realizing they were doing it. I let them think I didn't mind, because it was easier to be underestimated than to deal with the scrutiny and the constant picking apart of every choice I made. They never knew about the years I'd been building something behind the scenes, something that didn't need their approval, their advice, or their applause. And in that moment, with the taste of overcooked beef still in my mouth and the sound of their self-satisfied chatter filling the space I had just cleared with a single sentence, I realized I didn't want to just prove them wrong. I wanted to do it in a way they could never forget. So I smiled, took another bite like nothing had happened, and let them go on believing they'd won that round. Let them keep picturing me as the one who'd never quite figured it out. Because when the truth finally came out, and it would, sooner than they imagined, it wasn't going to be in some quiet conversation over coffee, or in a phone call where I nervously asked if they were proud of me now. No, it was going to be loud, public, and impossible to ignore, the kind of reveal that rewrites the story in people's heads whether they want it rewritten or not. And the best part was, I didn't even have to change anything about the way I acted to get there. All I had to do was keep my mouth shut, keep my head down, and let them keep feeding the narrative they'd built, right up until the day I decided to tear it apart. As Dad kept pouring himself wine and Rachel kept performing her version of corporate royalty, I sat there feeling that rare, steady kind of calm you get when you know the game is already over, and the other side doesn't even realize it yet. The thought made me almost want to laugh, but I didn't. I just kept chewing, nodding, and filing away every condescending comment in my head because every single one of them was going to make the reveal that much sweeter. They thought they were asking about my future, but they were already living in it. They just hadn't caught up to the part where I win. And as I got up from the table that night, kissed Mom on the cheek, and told everyone I had an early start the next day, I didn't feel the usual mix of irritation and exhaustion that these dinners used to leave me with. I felt focused. Unshakable. Like someone who had just made the quietest move in the game and knew it was going to lead straight to checkmate. They could keep their promotions, their toasts, and their smug little digs. I already had what I needed, and soon, they'd know exactly what that meant. If you've ever been cast as the family cautionary tale, you know the rhythm by heart, because it starts early and it never really stops, and every milestone that should have been neutral gets turned into a measurement. And every comparison turns into a morality play with the same moral every time, which is that some people make sensible choices and collect gold stars while others drift and dabble and are a little embarrassing at holidays. And I learned to live inside that role the way you learn. To live with background noise, because fighting it took energy I needed for other things, and because the fastest way to end a conversation with my parents was to nod and let them believe what they already believed. What I never told them, and what I am telling you now because you asked how this really felt and not the clean version I put on social media, is that the part that stung wasn't even the comments about me. It was the cheerleading for Rachel as if she had been born with a map and a compass while I was born with a blindfold, even though I was the one who taught her how to turn a pile of messy data into a pitch deck that hit like a truck. The one who pulled all-nighters before her presentations while she slept because she couldn't think visually, the one who sat on Zoom calls pretending to be a silent note-taker while I rewrote lines in the chat that she repeated word for word and then thanked the team for later. And I did it because I was a good sister and because that was the only version of useful they were willing to see. There was a Christmas a few years back when our cousin Mark said his company had an opening that was perfect for me, and he set up an informal chat with his director. And for the first time in a long time, I watched my parents' faces soften toward me as if maybe I was about to step onto the approved path, and then the call never happened, and the emails went cold. And months later, I saw the forwarded thread by accident when Rachel used my laptop and didn't log out of her account, and there it was in black and white, the little note she sent to Mark the night before my chat. The one where she said I was sweet but unreliable and that she worried recommending me would make him look bad, and she framed it like she was protecting him because she knew me best. And I closed the laptop, made tea, and told no one, because I understood something important right then, which was that I would never beat Rachel at her game if I kept trying to play it the way she did, and that my only move was to make myself the person she couldn't see coming. So I did what looked like nothing from the outside and everything from the inside, which was that I said yes to a project that didn't have a logo yet and yes to a co-founder who didn't care where my parents thought I ranked and yes to the kind of slow, unglamorous building that doesn't photograph well and doesn't fit on a bragging toast. And I learned to ignore the noise without becoming numb to it, which is harder than it sounds, because you have to keep your heart soft enough to care about the work and tough enough not to care about the commentary. And while they laughed about my little side hustle, I taught myself how to negotiate tiny contracts, how to read terms that were designed to trick me, how to say no when a yes would have made people stop asking questions for 5 minutes, and all of that is the unsexy truth of how you change your life when nobody is clapping. The dinner where Dad did his line and I did mine ended early, which was a mercy, because I could feel the old version of me itching to make peace, to send the soft follow-up text that said no hard feelings and maybe I overreacted, but instead I drove home, opened my laptop, and went back through years of shared folders where Rachel had quietly built her reputation on decks and memos that I had polished to a shine, and for the first time I didn't feel guilty about seeing how much of her shine had my fingerprints under it. I just felt done. Around 9, Rachel texted what she always texts when she has an emergency on a weeknight, which is a breezy one-liner that pretends we are a team, something like, "Need your magic for the big Monday pitch. Can you do a quick pass on the story and clean up the charts," with a link to a new deck and a clock ticking behind the words. and I looked at it for a long minute because muscle memory is real. And then I thought about that email to Mark and all the tiny digs that added up to this family myth where she was the maker and I was the helper, and I typed back slowly so I wouldn't soften it out of habit, and I said I wasn't available tonight or tomorrow or the day after, and that if she intended to present any slides that still contained my drafts from the old shared folder, she should remove them, because I no longer consented to their use. And I hit send and put the phone face down and waited for the phone to light up like a tree. It did immediately, with a string of messages that started playful and turned sharp, because that is how it goes with Rachel when you set a boundary. And she reminded me that family helps family and that this was important and that she had vouched for me so many times, which I almost laughed at, and I did not bite, I did not explain. I did not send screenshots of her note to Mark even though the urge ran hot through my fingers. I just told her I hoped the pitch went well and that I was not the person she could call at the last minute anymore, and then I archived the thread so I wouldn't stare at the bubbles. I do not know if that counts as revenge to anyone else, because it wasn't dramatic and it did not humiliate her in public, but in my bones it felt like the first real move. Because for years she had fed on my quiet competence while mocking the parts of me that built it, and saying no took the battery out of a machine that had run far too long, and the satisfaction wasn't about watching her scramble. It was about feeling the click of a door I'd kept open out of old loyalty finally shut, and that click was loud enough to silence the whole house. 10 minutes later my phone rang with the only call that mattered, the one from my lawyer who does not do theater and never calls this late unless something is shifted. And she said the last signature came through and the filings were accepted and the numbers we had only said out loud in guarded tones were now ink on paper, and I pressed the phone to my ear and listened to the words that meant the next phase had officially started. And while she explained the timeline for the announcement, I walked back to my desk and opened a blank doc and typed a single sentence I had been saving for years, which was a line I planned to send to exactly the right people at exactly the right time, and then I stopped, because before I pressed send on anything, I needed to do one more thing that would make the reveal land exactly the way I wanted, and that thing would happen tomorrow when everyone was watching someone else. There is a particular kind of relief that comes when you stop arguing with a story other people keep telling about you and instead let it run on its own battery, because once you accept that they need the version where you are the soft, unserious one to feel correct about their choices, you can use that need like a shield, and that is exactly what I did in the days after the dinner. When the family chat lit up with congratulatory messages for Rachel and photos of flowers on her desk and a long caption from Dad on his favorite platform about grit and hustle and what it means to raise a doer, and I did not jump in to poke any holes or correct any memory. I just watched them talk and let the narrative gather velocity while I moved pieces they could not see. The first move was boring to anyone who isn't me, which is why it worked, because no one gets excited about paperwork, yet paperwork is what makes the difference between a good day and a takeover. So I sat with my lawyer and we walked line by line through the last round of filings until I could recite the clauses about representation and name usage like a bedtime prayer. And we scheduled the announcement window with the kind of precision people reserve for weddings and surgeries, and I asked dumb questions on purpose to make sure every risk had a lid on it, and when she finally closed her laptop and told me we were locked, I felt a steadiness I have never felt at any family dinner in my life. Because this was a container they could not puncture with a snide comment or a fake laugh. This was done in ink and registered in places no one in my family has ever thought to look. The second move was pettier, and I am not going to pretend it wasn't, but sometimes you have to pull a splinter to let a wound close. And the splinter was the old shared folder where Rachel had been borrowing my brain for years under the heading of sisterly teamwork. So I opened the permissions panel and I sat there a long time staring at the list of names. And then I did what I should have done a long time ago, which was revoke access to everything that had my draft language in it, and I wrote a clear, factual email to the address she uses when she is being her professional self, not the one with emojis and exclamation points. And I told her that going forward she did not have consent to present or circulate slides that contained my original frameworks or copy, and I attached a short list of file names and dates so there could be no confusion. And I copied a general legal inbox at her firm so that if anyone decided to test me, they would have to do it out loud. There was a beat of silence, and then, right on cue, the phone lit up with a smiling text from Mom about how proud she was of both her girls and how she hoped we knew that, which is the message she sends when she senses a storm and wants to skip the rain. And I took a breath and sent back something warm and brief because I am not made of stone, and then I put the phone down and did not respond to the next thing, which was Rachel's half-joking, half-warning line about me making things complicated. For no reason, because that used to work on me and it does not work anymore, not when I can see the end of this road from where I am standing. The third move was the one that made me smile alone in my kitchen, not because it would hurt anyone, but because it felt like pure alignment, which was to curate a tiny list of names who would receive the first wave of calls when the wire hit. Not the loudest people or the ones with the flashiest logos, but the people who had watched me build without demanding I perform it for them, and a few former colleagues who had kept quiet when others rolled their eyes, and one editor who once told me my work read like a person who had actually done the thing she was describing, and to each of them I sent a short note that said, in plain words, that there would be news in the morning and I would appreciate their eyes on it. And I timed the emails to go out while everyone at home would be toasting Rachel at her celebration dinner, because there is a difference between revenge that scorches the earth and revenge that quietly rearranges the furniture so the room never feels the same again. And I am not interested in fire. I am interested in the moment a person sits down and realizes the chair is not where they left it. That afternoon, Dad posted a photo where he is giving a thumbs up in front of a plaque with Rachel's new title under it, and he wrote about legacy and making choices early and setting an example for the next generation. And I stared at it longer than I should have, and then closed the app because I could feel the heat in my chest that always leads to a message I delete 5 seconds later. And instead, I opened my own profile and updated a single line that no one in my family would notice because they do not look unless it is Rachel's page, a line that changed my public title from an unhelpful catch-all to exactly what I am, and I locked the settings so any tag or mention would route through me before it could land. Because tomorrow morning was going to be loud and I wanted to hear it on my terms. There is a temptation to tell you I felt virtuous about all of this, to wrap it in a lesson about patience and self-belief, but the honest version is messier and more human. Because underneath the strategy one, I'm still the person who once spent an entire weekend fixing a sentence for Rachel while she went wine tasting, and that girl cried a little when she pressed the button that revoked access, not because she regretted it, but because some part of me still wished the story could have unfolded without any of this, that they could have seen me without me having to stage the reveal like a show, and I think admitting that is the only thing that kept me from going too far when the next opportunity arrived. An hour before the celebration dinner, I sent one more email, short and polite and impossible to argue with, to the organizer who had asked me to contribute a congratulatory anecdote for a slideshow, because of course there was a slideshow. And I told her I could not provide one and that they did not have my permission to use any photos of me in their materials, and I mentioned that I was happy to discuss it in detail with their communications lead if needed, and then I put the phone face down and went to make a late lunch, and while I stood there listening to the knife hit the cutting board, the watch on my wrist buzzed with the calendar alert my lawyer had set earlier, the one that marked the moment the embargo lifted on the first press note in the morning. And for the first time in a long time, I stopped planning and just stood still, because the pieces were placed, the emails were timed, the permissions were set, and the only thing left to do was show up tonight and let them talk. Because in the morning the words would not belong to them anymore. I showed up to the promotion dinner the way I show up to dentist appointments and budget meetings, steady and prepared to be bored while other people pretended it was a party, because I knew my job wasn't to sparkle or to fix the awkward pauses. My job was to let the room run exactly the way it always runs so that when the switch flipped tomorrow it would be undeniable that nothing about my tone or my face or my posture had changed. Only the facts had, and that is a strangely peaceful mindset to carry into a room full of people who have always been loud about the wrong things, especially when the first thing I saw was a poster board leaning against the wall with Rachel's new title printed in large letters like a campaign sign. surrounded by markers for guests to write affirmations, and I almost laughed because it was perfect for what I needed. Not because I wanted to mock her, but because spectacle draws eyes, and I needed as many eyes as possible looking in one direction while I moved. A different lever entirely. The table filled the way those tables always fill, with coworkers who talk in acronyms and a manager who is trying to be everyone's favorite uncle and a handful of family members who have learned to nod along to office folklore they do not understand. And Rachel sat at the head as if she had been born in that chair, and she told the story she always tells when she is in front of a crowd, a tight little narrative about grit and late nights and learning to raise the bar, and I let her have it. Without interruption, because it is important to let a person finish the script they think they are living before you show them the real footage, and when she finally came up for air, I asked the kind of questions only an enthusiastic older sister would ask. The kind that make a brag feel even bigger, like what metrics she was going to own this quarter, and which clients she was excited to present to, and how the executive team had framed the growth targets, and she did what I knew she would do. Because she cannot help herself, she gave me specifics, names and dates and percentages, and a word-for-word description of a deck structure that is not hers and never was, and in the moment it was just noise to the room, pleasant managerial noise. But in the morning those details would sit next to a very public press note and make her favorite myth about who does the building sound a little thinner. I did not drink because I wanted a clean head and dry hands for the thing I needed to do 20 minutes into the meal, which was a small move that would read to everyone else as nothing at all and to Rachel as a stone in her shoe she could not shake. And it started when her manager, who is an eager person who loves theater, asked if she could give the room a peek at Monday's pitch because he wanted to bless the team with a taste of her storytelling excellence, and Rachel, high on the applause, pulled out her phone to airplay a few slides to the restaurant screen that someone had very helpfully set up. And the second she tried to open the deck, the screen showed a gray box and the words that I had known would appear the moment she touched anything with my scaffolding under it. Access revoked by the owner, and for a beat she thought it was a Wi-Fi issue. Then she thought it was an app issue, and then she made the face she makes when she realizes the problem is not the tool. The problem is the permission, and she laughed it off and changed the subject with the confidence of someone who believes all problems are temporary when an audience loves you. But her eyes clipped to me like a magnet, and I did not hold the gaze. Because no one in that room needed to see that we both understood what had happened. My quiet little no from the night before had grown teeth. If you think that was the move I came for, it wasn't. That was only the reminder I needed to stay cold, because the real trap depended on three things lining up with the kind of timing you usually only get during weather alerts. And the first was an email that had to land while Rachel was mid-toast and incapable of stepping away from the table without making a scene, an email my lawyer had drafted in clean, neutral language that cited the dates and file names of materials I had withdrawn and made a narrow, reasonable request that her firm confirm in writing that no derivative work based on those frameworks would be used in external presentations, and we timed it so that the message would hit both her inbox and the general legal inbox, which meant that by the time she returned to her phone there would be a polite, visible boundary waiting for her, and the second dependency was a short note to the restaurant event coordinator, scheduled earlier that afternoon, asking that the check be split in an unusual way at the end of the night, with a portion charged to a corporate card that bore the name of a company no one in my family knew existed alongside mine. Because the few people who pay attention to such things would see it printed clearly on the receipt, and they would ask a harmless question that would not have a satisfying answer until morning. The third piece wasn't transactional at all, and maybe that is why it felt the most like revenge even though it hurt no one, because it was simply this. When they asked me to stand and say a few words about my sister, the way older sisters are expected to do at these events, I did not decline, and I did not grandstand. I told the truth in a way that sounded generous and tasted like steel. I said that Rachel is excellent at commanding a room and that she thrives when people look to her for certainty, and that she has always been brave about taking credit, which earned a laugh because they heard it as a compliment, and then I said that the thing I respect most is not her drive. It is the way she is willing to stand at the front of the room and promise outcomes with her name on them, because promising is a risk. Promising locks you in. Promising means the receipts are coming. And I raised my glass and I said I hoped the people in this room would be just as loud when the outcomes were counted as they are tonight while promises are being made, and the room cheered like I had blessed them, and Rachel smiled the way you smile when you are not sure if you have been hugged or warned. It would be neater to tell you that she confronted me in the hallway or that we had a cathartic fight by the bathrooms, but nothing so cinematic happened. We hugged goodnight like women who were taught to pretend in public. And I walked out into a night that did not care about any of this, and I sat in my car for a minute to let the noise leak out of my head, and then my phone blinked with 2 new messages that mattered. The first from the editor, who had agreed to take an early look at the morning note, a simple thumbs up written in words that said "ready when you are," and the second from my lawyer with a single line that made my chest go still, "Wire scheduled for first light," and in that wide quiet, I queued one more message. A short sentence to the family chat time for sunrise, and then I put the phone away because the last act of control tonight was to sleep, to let the trap sit untouched, to let them keep believing this party was the point while the real point rolled toward us. Like an ordinary morning. Morning did not arrive with trumpets or a movie soundtrack. It arrived with the small normalities that make big moments feel almost rude. The kettle clicking off, the neighbor's dog, the quiet seconds before screens wake up. And I stood there with my mug and let the world be ordinary for one more breath, because I knew that once the first alert hit, nothing about the next few hours would feel ordinary again. And then the phone buzzed with the first message I had been waiting for, a short confirmation from my lawyer that the wire had landed and that the embargo time was unlocked, which meant the note I had held in drafts for longer than I will admit could finally move, and I tapped send and watched it go to the list I built one by one. The editor, the 2 former colleagues, the investor who liked substance more than theater, and then I opened the link she had included and saw my name printed next to the only sentence that mattered. Acquisition finalized. Terms undisclosed. Founder 2. Join as strategic partner, and where another person might have wished for a parade of zeros, I felt grateful for the quiet power of that word undisclosed. Because the people who understand this world know what undisclosed means when you pair it with founder and partner, and they can do the math without me spelling it, while the people who only understand volume will have to watch the crowd react to understand what they missed. The first replies came fast from the people who had been looped in, clean lines like "proud of you" and "let me know if you want a quote," and the editor did what good editors do, which is move quickly without sounding breathless. The piece went up on their site with a headline that was almost comically understated: "Founder sells company, stays on to lead growth," and under it a sentence that used my full name and a title I had finally claimed for myself in public, which was a different kind of satisfaction than the money, because the money was numbers on a screen and a cushion against chaos, while the name next to that title was years of being called the wrong thing finally corrected in a place that could not be erased by a family story. I did not have to go to the family chat to see the first ripple, because my father's favorite platform lit up with tags and I was in them whether I liked it or not. Colleagues from old projects posting congratulations with their own stories about work I had done when no one was looking. People I barely remembered quoting lines I had written in documents that had lived in folders under someone else's badge, and there it was. The counter-narrative building itself without me, and when Dad finally texted the group, it was not a question or a dig. It was a clumsy paragraph about being surprised and proud and wishing I had told them sooner, which read to me like an attempt to step into a moving train without acknowledging that he had been standing on the wrong platform for years, and I will admit that I stared at it long enough to feel the old ache start up. The part of me that wants the father who knows how to say sorry in a full sentence, and then I put the phone down because there were other texts coming that mattered more. Rachel called instead of texting, which is her way of trying to seize tempo, and I let it ring once because I am still a sister even when I am playing chess, and I answered with a hello that was calm on purpose, and she went straight to the line she thought would buy her time. The one about the legal note messing with her pitch, and how this was all a misunderstanding that we could clear up if I would just be reasonable, and I listened the way you listen to a person who has always assumed you will fold, and then I told her that reasonable for me meant what I had already written down, that no material with my frameworks or copy would be presented externally under her name or her firm's, that the separation was clean and necessary, and that if she needed help building something original, I could recommend people who do that work for a living. And I said it kindly because I do not enjoy humiliating anyone, not even her. And then I gave her the line I had been saving, not as a dagger but as a mirror. I said, you are good at promising and I am good at building, and from now on the credits will match the work. And she exhaled in that tight way that tells you the words landed somewhere real. And she tried one more time to make sisterhood mean silence. And I let the attempt pass and told her I hoped her pitch still went well, and I ended the call before the part where she would ask if the number was as big as the rumor, because I refused to let my value be a dollar amount in a family gossip loop. The next satisfying click came from the place no one else in my family ever watches, the company account where the press note turned into inbound. Not the spammy kind, but the serious kind. Introductions from people who had ignored me when my email signature was small, and a quiet invitation from a foundation I respect to sit on a panel about founder mental health, which felt like a private victory I didn't need to perform for anyone. And then my calendar chimed for the small courtesy I had queued for the family at sunrise, a one-line message in the chat that said I have a meeting at noon but wanted to say I'm fine and I'll call later, which was true. I was fine, and I would call, just not now. Because the first calls I owed were to the people who had helped me get here without demanding I minimize myself to keep a room comfortable. If you are waiting for me to describe a final showdown, a tearful confrontation at a kitchen table, or a dramatic speech that rewires a father's heart, I cannot give you that, because real life is duller and sharper than a scene, and the win rarely looks like a confession. It looks like the moment the air changes and everybody who used to talk over you now weighs their words, and in my case it looked like this: a notification that the restaurant had processed last night's bill and a digital receipt with that unfamiliar company name printed next to mine hitting the inbox of a manager who loves proof more than stories. A thread in his team chat asking who exactly is Emily and how did we miss this. A second thread at Rachel's firm where a junior legal associate flagged my email and attached the screenshot of the access revocation on the deck, and then a third ripple on the platform where business people congratulate business people. My face next to a caption from someone with a very large following that read quietly impressive and long overdue, and all of that happened without me raising my voice or asking for permission, which is the only kind of revenge that has ever felt clean to me. When I finally did call my parents that evening, I kept it simple. I said I was good and working and happy, and when Dad tried to pivot into a lecture about family communication, I said no thank you, not today. And when Mom asked if this meant I would come to the next Sunday dinner, I said yes, because I am not exiling myself from a table I helped set just because other people used it to hand out rankings. And I ended the call with a line that was not a jab and not a speech, just a boundary with a little humor to make it go down. I said I got serious a long time ago. I just waited until the results could do the talking, and then I hung up and let the quiet settle, not the brittle quiet of being dismissed. The solid quiet of having moved the last piece into place. I do not know if they will ever say the thing I once wanted to hear, and maybe that is the point, because the plan was never to extract a confession or to teach a lesson. The plan was to take the story back and put my name on the work that was mine, and to make sure the next time someone asked at a table who gets to define success, there would be one fewer person willing to laugh at the wrong moment. And if you need a final image, it is not champagne or a headline framed on a wall, it is me. Closing the old shared folder for the last time and opening a new one that has only my name on it, and feeling the quiet satisfaction of a checkmate set up over years, delivered in one morning, clean, undeniable, and done.